I'm David Lombardo, and you're listening to WCNY's The Capitol Press Room. This spring, by a near unanimous vote, state lawmakers approved legislation designed to regulate and protect the Mohawk River basin, a nearly 3,500 square mile region that makes up about a quarter of the Hudson River drainage area. For more on these long-term planning and preservation efforts, we're joined by Jeremey Cherson, Associate Director of Government Affairs for Riverkeeper, which focuses on the protection and restoration of the Hudson River. Well, for starters, can you describe the scope of the Mohawk River Basin, including where it is and, I guess, what it encompasses?
Sure. So the Mohawk River is the largest tributary to the Hudson River and a fabulous waterway in its own right, even if it was not just a tributary of the Hudson. It's 147 miles long. As you said, 25% of the entire drainage of the Hudson, and that's 2.2 million acres of the entire watershed. It spans from the Adirondacks, where it starts in the north, to beginning in Oneida County in the west, to even supplying some of New York City's drinking water with the Schoharie Creek and the Schoharie Reservoir, which is the furthest north of all of New York City's watershed systems, which flow into it. So it's a pretty substantial waterway, in addition to supplying almost 250,000 people in the Mohawk Valley, as well as the Capital Region, with drinking water.
Well, more than a decade and a half ago now, New York formed the Mohawk River Basin Program under the State Department of Environmental Conservation, which was responsible for implementing an action agenda similar to the Hudson River Estuary Program, with funding coming from the Environmental Protection Fund. How would the pending legislation, which establishes a Mohawk River Basin District to manage the area, compare to what's already in place?
Sure. So the Mohawk Basin Program is a regulatory program that was created by the DEC, whereas the Hudson River Estuary Program, which is kind of the sister program that almost oversees the Mohawk program and has kind of staff embedded, and they work really closely together, is a statutory program. And so there's a little bit of a difference where I think we and a lot of stakeholders in the Mohawk feel like the river hasn't gotten its full due, given how substantial of an impact it has on the state and the region. So what the bill would do is it would make sure that the basin program run by the DEC is put into statute so it can never go away. And it mimics what the Hudson has, which is a stakeholder advisory committee made up of scientists, of local elected officials, of state government officials, and federal agencies that discuss issues facing the river, help guide the planning of the 10-year action agenda that sets forth how the agency and the state and stakeholders are going to improve the river and make progress on their goals. And it creates an accountability structure that has been incredibly successful on the Hudson and has catalyzed a ton of action and engagement. And we feel like the time is right for that to happen on the Mohawk. There has been a Mohawk River Symposium that Union College has been putting on for a number of years now, building up that group of scientists and nonprofits and agencies that have worked together. And so we really feel like the time is right to really institutionalize the Basin program.
Well, what has been the practical effect of the Mohawk River Basin not getting its due, so to speak? Have there been problems with the management or preservation of the region under the status quo?
I wouldn't necessarily frame it as a problem, but compared to the Hudson, where you have this deep, storied history of environmental and conservation advocacy and activism, that isn't necessarily the case on the Mohawk River to the same extent. And so we're really trying to catalyze that type of engagement in the region, because we know there are people there are institutions that really care about the river, the tributaries, and we want to build a place for everybody to come together to work to get additional state funding, additional federal funding, additional foundation grants that the Hudson and Long Island Sound or the Great Lakes have been so successful at getting. I think if we are able to catalyze that type of engagement, we can kind of go even further together.
Well, what do the benefits of all of those formalized structures and funding solicitation efforts look like? What does this mean for people looking to either enjoy the region, looking to drink the water? What are the potential short and long-term benefits of something like this?
Well, there's a lot of risks and issues along the Mohawk River that are probably too much for one agency and one small set of staff to work with, which is why you need these partnerships. For instance, PFAS, forever chemicals, are a big issue on the Mohawk because you have the Colony landfill, you have other landfills that are sending landfill leachate, which is like a watery sludge that they transport to wastewater treatment plants that then dump the untreated waste, which can't process PFAS and certain toxic chemicals, into the Mohawk. You also have road salt and salinity increases in the Mohawk, as well as the Great Flats aquifer, which is a big water source. And you need people to come together and work with the municipalities, with the state, to reduce the application of road salt in the region. There's also 400 dams along the tributaries of the Mohawk out of 6,000 statewide. These aren't hydropower dams necessarily providing electricity. They were built in the milling era in the 1800s and no longer serve a purpose, but they trap sediment, they can cause flooding, and 30 of them are high hazard dams with over 50 of them as intermediate hazard dams. So there is kind of risk coming in the future. If those break, you have flooding, you have other risks of the sediment trapped behind going downstream. And so you just need a lot of people working on these issues. And so we hope that by getting this bill signed and creating this advisory council, we can expand the amount of advocates, the team of people working on these challenges. And I haven't even mentioned the invasive species risk from the Great Lakes, which is another huge, huge topic that we're trying to address.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that invasive species component because that's spelled out in the legislation, and part of the requirement would be to develop a plan to prevent the proliferation of aquatic invasive species in and throughout the Mohawk River Basin District. So what are the risks, and is this something where we'd be playing catch-up right now, or do you think there's still time to be proactive on the proliferation of invasive species there?
You've talked with folks about the round goby before, which was a threat that came up into Lake Champlain and is now came from the Mississippi through the Great Lakes, through the Erie Canal, into the Hudson, up into the Champlain Canal. And with the round goby, we were playing catch up. With the zebra mussels, we're playing catch up. But there's another threat, which is Asian carp. These are basically gigantic goldfish that are incredibly voracious and outcompete the native wildlife within the river. And their DNA has been detected in the Great Lakes. We're not sure if they've made it through the canal yet into the Hudson system. It doesn't necessarily seem like they've made it or they've made it in great numbers. But that is the main risk at this moment, is that these carp make it through. And so we're looking to study potentially different interventions that could be put in place to prevent or slow down the spread of this species to buy us more time. because it would be devastating if they get through.
So, sticking with personnel for this initiative, in addition to the advisory committee that we referenced, this would also establish a new position of Mohawk Watershed Coordinator. Is that all of the paid people that you envision necessary for something like this, or would you need additional support and staff for something like an advisory committee? Or is it safe to assume that if, for some reason, the governor signed this, that they would just be having existing DEC staff take on double or triple duty?
Well, luckily, we already have a Mohawk Basin coordinator that runs the existing Mohawk Basin program. So there wouldn't necessarily be any additional staff costs associated with this legislation. And the way the Hudson River Estuary Program runs the advisory committee, it is chaired by a member of that committee that is not necessarily a staff member of the DEC. And DEC attends those meetings, presents at those meetings, but they do not necessarily run those meetings. So for the operation of the advisory committee, it wouldn't necessarily create additional labor for our overburdened DEC staff.
Well, finally, what safeguards are there when you look at this, aside from having it codified as opposed to the current system, which is just relying on the whims of the executive? Are there any safeguards you think to ensure that this is something that the state will lean into with both shoulders, so to speak? Because we've had task forces and other commissions that have been tasked with looking at things and monitoring things, and years later you come back and it's like, oh, they never met. Who cares, apparently? So besides just people like you might be chirping at the governor's office if they don't follow through, is there any sort of safeguard or things that you think things that you think would ensure a smooth implementation and constant effort on this?
Right now, the Mohawk Basin Program and DEC are working on their draft Mohawk River Basin Plan for the next 10 years, their action agenda. They are planning the future of their actions. We are currently part of a group that meets with the New York State Canal Corporation, which manages the Erie Canal, as well as DEC, that's just looking specifically at the invasive species issue. And there are so many local nonprofits and institutions that have really leaned into working on the Mohawk that we can call upon to push for accountability. But we're really looking to be a partner with the DEC and the state here and to help them do their job better. So I don't foresee in this regard a potential to have to fight the executive over this. We really see this as a situation like on the Hudson, where we really help the DEC and the agencies achieve the goals that they set out.
Well, we've been speaking with Jeremey Cherson. He's an Associate Director of Government Affairs for Riverkeeper. Jeremey, thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Support for the Capitol Press Room comes from O'Donnell & Associates, a public affairs firm providing strategic guidance to businesses and nonprofits on navigating policy and regulatory issues. More information is available at o'donnellsolutions.com.